What if the most feared species in the galaxy wasn't the one with the biggest weapons, the strongest bodies, or the most advanced technology? What if it was the species everyone laughed at, the humans? For 300 years, the Galactic Council treated humanity like a cosmic joke. Too primitive, too emotional, too unpredictable. They banned humans from military operations, called them dangerous wildcards, and relegated them to mining colonies on dead worlds. But when the Zarathi Hive, a force that had consumed 17 civilizations, turned their hungry eyes toward the galaxy's core worlds, everything changed. The Council's greatest warriors fell in hours. Their most advanced fleets were reduced to floating debris. In their darkest hour, with extinction breathing down their necks, they were forced to watch footage that would shatter everything they thought they knew about the species they had mocked. The footage showed humans doing what humans do best, the impossible. This is the story of how the galaxy's greatest joke became its only hope, and why the Galactic Council would never underestimate humanity again. Ambassador Zelthan's crystalline form shimmered with barely contained amusement as he read the human petition for the third time. The delicate facets of his silicon-based body caught the artificial sunlight streaming through the massive windows of the Galactic Council chambers, casting rainbow patterns across the polished floor. Around him, representatives from 47 different species filled the amphitheater-style seating, their various forms creating a tapestry of evolutionary diversity that never failed to inspire awe in first-time visitors. The Altarians floated in their environmental suits, their gaseous forms swirling in mesmerizing patterns. The massive Gorvani delegates sat like living mountains, their rocky skin scarred from centuries of asteroid mining. Sleek Vorthan hunters perched on specialized platforms, their predatory grace evident even in the formal setting of the council chambers. Each species represented millions of years of evolution, advanced civilizations that had contributed to the galactic community in ways both profound and practical. And then, there were the humans. Distinguished colleagues, Zelthan began, his voice resonating through the chamber's translation systems with the subtle harmonics that marked his species' natural communication method. We gather today to address yet another request from the human delegation regarding their exclusion from military operations within Galactic Council jurisdiction. A ripple of what could charitably be called laughter passed through the assembled delegates. The sound was a cacophony of different species' expressions of mirth, clicking mandibles, resonant hums, subsonic growls, and ethereal chimes, but the sentiment was universal. The humans and their endless petitions had become something of a running joke in the council chambers. High Counselor Vrax, the Gorvani representative whose massive frame dominated the central platform, shifted his weight with a sound like grinding stone. His voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of someone who had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. Ambassador Zelthan, how many such petitions have we received from the human delegation in the past solar cycle? Zelthan's form flickered as he accessed his internal data networks. 17 formal petitions, High Counselor, each one requesting reconsideration of Resolution 445X, which restricts human involvement in council military operations to non-combat support roles only. And how many times have we explained the reasoning behind this restriction? Vrax's tone carried the weight of infinite patience tested by finite circumstances. Every single time, High Counselor. The human delegation sat in their assigned section with what appeared to be admirable restraint, though Zelthan's enhanced sensors could detect the elevated stress indicators common to their species when agitated. Commander Sarah Chun, their lead representative, maintained the rigid posture that seemed to be a default setting for humans in formal situations. Her dark hair was pulled back in the severely practical style favored by their military caste, and her eyes, those peculiar organs that seemed to convey far more information than should be possible, remained fixed on the speaking platform. Beside her sat Dr. Marcus Webb, the human delegation's scientific advisor, whose nervous fidgeting had become a familiar sight during these sessions. His fingers drummed against his data pad in a rhythm that Zelthan's pattern recognition systems had long since cataloged as a stress response. The third member of their delegation, General Harrison Burke, represented their military leadership, and seemed to exist in a state of perpetual, barely controlled frustration that radiated from him like heat from a fusion core. The humans continue to ignore fundamental reality, announced Council Member THYSS, her reptilian features arranged in what her species considered a diplomatic expression of patient condescension. They are biologically unsuited for modern warfare. Their reaction times are glacial compared to enhanced species. Their technology levels remain centuries behind current military standards. Most critically, their psychological profiles indicate dangerous instability under combat stress. A series of approving sounds echoed through the chamber. The evidence was overwhelming, documented across hundreds of conflicts and thousands of individual assessments. Humans were simply too slow, too primitive, and too unpredictable to be trusted with serious military responsibilities. Commander Chen requested permission to speak, her voice carrying the crisp professionalism that humans seem to apply to everything they did. Honored counselors, with respect, our combat record speaks for itself. Human forces have achieved tactical victories in situations deemed impossible by your own strategic assessments. Precisely the problem, interjected Ambassador Korth of the Zenthri Collective, his insectoid features clicking in agitation. Humans consistently disregard established tactical doctrine. They improvise in situations that call for precise execution. They make emotional decisions in circumstances that demand logical analysis. These traits make them unpredictable allies and potentially dangerous to coordinate with. Zelthan accessed the relevant files with a thought, displaying the holographic records in the chamber's central viewing area. The data painted a clear picture that had been consistent across 3 centuries of observation. Human forces showed remarkable individual tenacity and creativity, but they operated outside established parameters with such frequency that they posed a coordination nightmare for mixed species operations. The Battle of Kepler Station, Zelthan announced, highlighting relevant data streams. Human forces abandoned their assigned defensive positions to pursue an unauthorized defensive action. While they achieved their stated objectives, their actions left critical gaps in the overall defensive strategy that enemy forces could have exploited. The Tau Ceti incident, added Counselor Vrax. Humans disobeyed direct orders to retreat, choosing instead to mount a rescue operation for stranded civilians. Their unauthorized action compromised the strategic withdrawal and put the entire expeditionary force at risk. General Burke's stress indicators spiked noticeably. Those civilians were going to die. The calculated risk to the larger force outweighed the guaranteed loss of the civilian population. THYSS replied with the cold logic that made her species such effective strategic planners. This is precisely why humans cannot be trusted in military command positions. They consistently prioritize immediate emotional responses over long-term strategic necessities. The chamber filled with the sounds of agreement from dozens of species. The logic was unassailable. Military operations required precision, predictability, and adherence to established protocols. Humans seemed constitutionally incapable of operating within such parameters. Their tendency to go with their gut or play it by ear might make for entertaining stories, but it had no place in serious military planning. Dr. Webb leaned forward, his data pad displaying streams of information that he clearly hoped would support their case. Counselors, if you examine the outcomes rather than the methods, human forces maintain a success rate that exceeds galactic averages by 17%. Achieved through luck rather than skill. Ambassador Korth replied dismissively. Statistical anomalies do not constitute evidence of military competence. Furthermore, the psychological damage humans inflict upon themselves through combat exposure creates long-term stability issues that affect their judgment in subsequent operations. Commander Chin's jaw tightened in a way that Zelthan had learned indicated extreme displeasure in humans. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a treatable condition, Ambassador Korth. Our medical corps has developed effective intervention protocols, which further demonstrates the point, THYSS said smoothly. Properly evolved species do not require psychological rehabilitation after standard combat operations. The fact that humans routinely suffer mental breakdown under normal operational stress confirms their unsuitability for serious military responsibilities. The debate continued for another hour, following patterns that had been established decades earlier. The humans would present their case with admirable persistence, citing specific examples of tactical successes and individual heroism. The council would respond with overwhelming evidence of human unreliability, emotional instability, and technological inadequacy. The vote would proceed along predictable lines, with the humans' petition rejected by margins that grew more decisive with each iteration. What made this particular session notable was the interruption that came from an unexpected source. The chamber's emergency alert system activated with a harmony of tones that immediately silenced all conversation. When emergencies were announced in the council chambers, it meant something had gone catastrophically wrong somewhere in the galaxy. The massive display screens that ringed the amphitheater activated simultaneously, showing incoming priority communications from multiple sectors. High Counselor Vrax's massive form shifted as he processed the incoming data streams. For a being whose species measured emotional responses in geological timescales, the speed with which his expression changed indicated something truly unprecedented was occurring. Counselors, Vrax announced, his voice carrying undertones that Zelthan's translator marked as indicating extreme concern. We are receiving emergency transmissions from the Proxima defense grid. All communications indicate complete system failure. The chamber erupted in voices speaking dozens of languages as delegates attempted to process the implications. The Proxima defense grid protected the approach routes to the galaxy's core worlds, including the capital planet that housed the council itself. It was defended by the combined fleets of 12 major species, and equipped with defensive technology that had been refined over centuries of warfare. The idea that it could experience complete system failure was literally inconceivable. Ambassador Zelthan's crystalline form flickered rapidly as he processed incoming data streams. High Counselor, I'm receiving confirmation from multiple sources. The grid has gone completely dark. All defensive stations, all fleet assets, all communication arrays. Nothing is responding. THYSS rose from her seat, her reptilian features displaying the kind of alarm that her species reserved for existential threats. That is impossible. The Proxima defense grid is defended by more than 2,000 capital ships. The defensive stations alone mount enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. I am aware of the specifications, Counselor THYSS, Vrax replied grimly, which makes the complete communication blackout particularly concerning. The main display shifted to show the last known positions of the Proxima defense grid assets. The holographic representation showed a three-dimensional web of defensive positions that had been carefully constructed to provide overlapping fields of fire and mutual support. It was a masterpiece of military engineering, refined through generations of the galaxy's finest strategic minds. According to the most recent data, every single element of that defensive network had simply stopped transmitting. Dr. Webb's voice cut through the growing chaos in the chamber. Counselors, human deep space monitoring stations are detecting massive energy signatures consistent with Zarathi technology moving toward the Proxima sector. The silence that followed his statement was absolute. Every species represented in the chamber understood exactly what that meant, and none of them wanted to be the first to voice their fears. The Zarathi were the galaxy's nightmare made manifest. They were not conquerors in any conventional sense. They were consumers. Where other aggressive species sought territory or resources or strategic advantage, the Zarathi sought only to feed. They absorbed entire civilizations, converting organic and technological matter into more Zarathi, leaving behind only dead worlds scoured clean of anything that might once have been called life. For the past 50 years, the Zarathi had been contained beyond the galactic rim by a combination of military force and natural barriers. The galaxy's finest military strategists had studied them extensively, developing containment protocols that had successfully prevented any major incursions into civilized space. The consensus among experts was that the Zarathi lacked the organizational capacity to mount sustained offensives against prepared defensive positions. That consensus had apparently been wrong. Commander Chun stood slowly, her movements carrying the kind of controlled precision that Zelthan had learned indicated humans were about to say something important. Counselors, human forces request immediate authorization to deploy to the Proxima sector for reconnaissance and emergency response operations. The request was so audacious that it took several seconds for the assembled delegates to process what they had heard. Ambassador Korth was the first to respond, his mandibles clicking in what Zelthan recognized as incredulous disbelief. The humans wish to deploy to investigate a situation that has apparently neutralized the galaxy's most powerful defensive installation? This is exactly the kind of reckless thinking that demonstrates their unsuitability for military operations. General Burke stepped forward, his stress indicators now reading at levels that would have required medical intervention for most species. With respect, Ambassador Korth, human forces are already in position to provide immediate response. Our deep space monitoring network gives us real-time intelligence on the situation developing in the Proxima sector. THYSS's reptilian features arranged themselves in an expression of aristocratic disdain. General Burke, the idea that human forces could succeed where the combined might of the Council's finest military assets has apparently failed is beyond absurd. It borders on species delusion. The Zarathi have consumed 17 civilizations, Vrax added with the kind of finality that ended discussions. They have never been successfully opposed by military force. If they have indeed penetrated the Proxima defense grid, then our priority must be evacuation and containment, not futile gesture operations by technologically inferior forces. The debate that followed revealed the depth of the galaxy's dismissive attitude toward human military capabilities. Speaker after speaker rose to catalog the reasons why human forces were unsuited for the kind of operations that the current crisis demanded. They were too slow to engage Zarathi forces effectively. Their technology was too primitive to survive in the kind of hostile environment that the Zarathi created around themselves. Their psychological instability would make them unreliable under the extreme stress of facing an enemy that literally consumed everything in its path. The vote, when it finally came, was even more decisive than usual. 45 species voted to maintain existing restrictions on human military operations. Only the humans themselves voted in favor of authorization. Even those species that had traditionally maintained friendly relationships with humanity seemed to view the current crisis as too serious for emotional gestures. Commander Chun accepted the decision with the kind of professional grace that seemed to be encoded in human military training. Understood, counselors. Human forces will maintain current deployment status and await further orders. As the session adjourned and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Zelthan found himself reviewing the day's proceedings with a strange sense that something significant had occurred beyond the obvious crisis in the Proxima sector. The humans had accepted their exclusion from the military response with unusual calm. In previous sessions, their delegates had shown clear frustration when their petitions were rejected. Today, they seemed almost resigned to the outcome. More troubling was the data he had observed from their biometric readings throughout the session. While their stress indicators had spiked during discussions of the Zarathi threat, they had actually decreased when their military deployment request was denied. For a species that consistently demonstrated aggressive responses to challenges, their calm acceptance of exclusion seemed inconsistent with their established behavioral patterns. Ambassador Zelthan's crystalline form continued to flicker as he processed this anomaly. In his experience, humans were most dangerous when they appeared to be accepting situations they clearly disagreed with. Their capacity for independent action outside established authority structures was legendary, even if it was usually cited as evidence of their unsuitability for military cooperation. As he prepared to leave the chamber, Zelthan made a mental note to monitor human fleet movements in the coming days. Something about their delegation's behavior suggested that the Council's refusal to authorize human military operations might not be the end of the matter. And, given the current crisis, any unauthorized human actions could have consequences that extended far beyond their usual unpredictable results. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the species you underestimate most completely are the ones capable of surprises that change everything. And, in the darkness beyond the Proxima defense grid, ancient nightmares were stirring with hunger that had not been satisfied for far too long. The emergency session convened 18 hours after the Proxima defense grid went silent, and the news was worse than anyone had dared imagine. High Counselor Vrax's massive stone features seemed to have aged centuries in less than a day as he accessed the incoming intelligence reports. The chamber buzzed with nervous energy from 47 different species, each processing the crisis through their own evolutionary frameworks of fear and survival. Ambassador Zelthan's crystalline form pulsed with rapid data streams as he compiled the morning's intelligence briefings. The holographic displays surrounding the chamber painted a picture of catastrophe that defied comprehension. The Proxima defense grid, which had taken 50 years to construct and represented the pinnacle of galactic military engineering, no longer existed. Where once stood mighty space stations and patrolling fleets, only debris fields and gravitational anomalies remained. The reconnaissance drones have transmitted their findings, Vrax announced, his voice carrying harmonics of despair that the translation system struggled to convey. The Zarathi assault consumed everything. 2,000 capital ships, 47 defensive platforms, and 17 million personnel, all converted or destroyed within a 6-hour window. Counselor THYSS rose from her seat with movements that betrayed the shock underlying her species' legendary composure. High Counselor, our preliminary analysis suggests the Zarathi have undergone some form of technological evolution. Their assault patterns demonstrate capabilities far beyond previous observations. The main display shifted to show drone footage from the attack site. The images were difficult to process, even with the chamber's advanced visualization systems. Where the Proxima defense grid had maintained neat geometric formations of ships and stations, now only twisted metal and organic growths remained. The Zarathi had not simply destroyed the defenses, they had transformed them into something alien and horrifying. Ambassador Korth's insectoid features clicked rapidly as he processed the tactical implications. The attack demonstrated coordination levels we believe the Zarathi incapable of achieving. They struck simultaneously across multiple vectors, neutralized communication systems, and adapted their assault patterns in real time to counter defensive responses. Dr. Webb, representing the human delegation in the absence of their military leadership, raised his hand to request speaking privileges. His nervous fidgeting had been replaced by the kind of focused intensity that Zelthan had learned to associate with humans confronting serious problems. Counselors, human analysis of the attack patterns suggests the Zarathi have developed some form of central coordination system. Our xenobiology teams believe they may have achieved a breakthrough in collective consciousness technology. The chamber erupted in voices speaking dozens of languages as delegates struggled to comprehend the implications. A Zarathi collective consciousness would represent an evolutionary leap that changed every calculation about their threat level. Previous containment strategies had relied on their apparent lack of centralized command structure. If they had overcome that limitation, then every assumption about their capabilities needed to be revisited. Vrax's massive form shifted with grinding sounds that indicated deep distress. Dr. Webb, if your analysis is correct, then the Zarathi represent an existential threat to galactic civilization. No known defensive strategy can counter a coordinated assault by a force that adapts faster than we can respond. Which brings us to our immediate crisis, announced Admiral Taz of the Vorthan hunting fleets, his predatory grace evident even in the formal setting of the council chambers. Intelligence reports indicate massive Zarathi force concentrations moving toward the Centauri cluster. If they achieve the same level of success there, they will control approach routes to 70% of our core worlds. Zelfin accessed the strategic databases, displaying the relevant star maps in the chamber's central viewing area. The Centauri cluster controlled access to the galaxy's primary trade routes and industrial centers. Its loss would effectively cut civilized space in half, leaving entire sectors isolated and vulnerable to individual assault. What defensive assets do we have available for immediate deployment? THYSS asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer would be inadequate. Admiral Taz's features arranged themselves in what his species considered an expression of professional resignation. After the Proxima losses, our available capital ships number fewer than 800 across all member species. The Zarathi force approaching Centauri is estimated at more than 3,000 vessels, plus support elements that our intelligence cannot accurately count. The silence that followed this announcement stretched for long minutes as each delegate processed the mathematics of their situation. The galaxy's most powerful military forces had been reduced to less than a quarter of their enemy's strength, and that enemy had just demonstrated technological capabilities that exceeded every previous assessment. Dr. Webb cleared his throat with the distinctive sound that humans made when preparing to say something important. Counselors, the human delegation wishes to renew our request for authorization to deploy military forces in response to the Zarathi threat. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Ambassador Korth's mandibles clicked in rhythms that indicated extreme agitation. Dr. Webb, the humans possess fewer than 200 ships that could generously be classified as military vessels. Even if we were desperate enough to ignore their technological inadequacies, their forces would represent less than a rounding error in the current strategic balance. Furthermore, THYSS added with cold logic, human forces demonstrated during the Proxima crisis that they lack the capabilities for independent operations. While other species deployed reconnaissance assets to assess the situation, humans remained conspicuously absent from intelligence-gathering operations. Zelfin accessed the relevant operational logs, confirming THYSS's observation. Every major species had deployed some form of intelligence-gathering asset to observe the Proxima aftermath. The humans alone had made no such deployments, despite their earlier claims about deep space monitoring capabilities. Dr. Webb's stress indicators spiked noticeably, but his voice remained level. Counselors, human forces request deployment authorization for unconventional operations that may prove effective against Zarathi tactics. What sort of unconventional operations? Vrax asked, his tone carrying the patience of someone who expected to be disappointed but felt obligated to hear the complete proposal. I'm not authorized to discuss operational details in open session, Webb replied. However, human military leadership believes they have identified tactical vulnerabilities that more conventional forces have not exploited. The chamber filled with sounds of derision from multiple species. The idea that humans had identified tactical vulnerabilities that had escaped the galaxy's finest military minds was absurd on its face. Every aspect of Zarathi operations had been studied extensively by experts representing millions of years of combined military experience. Admiral Taz leaned forward with the fluid grace that made his species such effective hunters. Dr. Webb, are you suggesting that human tactical analysis has produced insights that have eluded species with vastly superior technological capabilities and military experience? I'm suggesting that different perspectives sometimes reveal different solutions, Webb replied carefully. Human tactical doctrine emphasizes adaptability and creative problem-solving in ways that may be applicable to the current crisis. Human tactical doctrine emphasizes chaos and improvisation, Korth responded sharply. Those approaches may produce occasional successes against conventional opponents, but the Zarathi are not conventional. They are an adaptive swarm intelligence that consumes everything in its path. They cannot be confused or misdirected by unpredictable tactics because they learn and adapt faster than tactical changes can be implemented. Counselor THYSS accessed her own intelligence databases, displaying analysis that had been prepared by the galaxy's leading xenobiological research centers. The Zarathi demonstrate response times measured in seconds for tactical adaptations that would require hours for conventional forces to implement. They process information and adjust their behavior faster than human nervous systems can generate conscious thought. Any tactical advantage based on surprise or misdirection would last only minutes at most. Webb's biometric readings indicated elevated stress, but he continued with admirable persistence. Counselors, human forces request the opportunity to attempt operations that conventional doctrine would consider impossible. If we fail, you lose only forces that you have already determined to be militarily insignificant. If we succeed, the galaxy gains tactical intelligence that could prove decisive. The debate that followed revealed the depth of the crisis facing galactic civilization. Speaker after speaker rose to catalog the military assets that had been lost, the strategic positions that could no longer be defended, and the technological advantages that the Zarathi had demonstrated. The picture that emerged was of a civilization facing an enemy that had evolved beyond every defensive strategy they could conceive. More troubling were the reports from refugee ships fleeing the outer sectors. The Zarathi were not simply conquering territory, they were transforming it. Worlds that had supported billions of inhabitants for millennia were being converted into hive structures that served purposes no one could understand. The refugees described landscapes that seemed alive, cities that pulsed with organic rhythms, and skies filled with creatures that might once have been people. The evacuation efforts are proving inadequate, reported Ambassador Veln of the Altarian Collective, her gaseous form swirling with patterns that indicated deep distress. Our transport capacity cannot accommodate the population centers in the Zarathi advance path. We are facing the extinction of entire civilizations. Vrax processed this information with the geological patience that characterized his species, but even his massive composure seemed strained by the scope of the disaster. How many inhabited systems lie in the projected Zarathi advance corridor? 437 confirmed inhabited worlds, with population estimates ranging from 12 billion to 47 billion sentient beings, Zelthan replied, his crystalline form flickering rapidly as he compiled the demographic data. Current evacuation capacity could accommodate perhaps 3% of that population before the projected Zarathi arrival. The numbers hung in the chamber's artificial atmosphere like a death sentence. 44 billion people facing extinction, and the galaxy's most advanced civilizations could save barely 1 in 30. The mathematics of genocide had never been presented so starkly in the council chambers. Dr. Webb stood again, his movements carrying the kind of controlled desperation that humans seem to specialize in when facing impossible odds. Counselors, I formally request that this session be moved to classified status. Human Military Command has authorized me to present operational details that may offer alternatives to evacuation. Admiral Taz's predatory features sharpened with interest. Dr. Webb, are you claiming that human forces possess capabilities relevant to evacuating 40 billion civilians from an advancing Zarathi swarm? I'm claiming that human forces may possess capabilities relevant to stopping that swarm, Webb replied quietly. The silence that followed this statement was absolute. Every delegate in the chamber understood that such a claim bordered on species delusion. The Zarathi had consumed civilizations that possessed technology centuries ahead of human capabilities. They had adapted to and overcome every military strategy that the galaxy's finest minds could devise. The idea that humans possessed some secret capability that could stop them was beyond optimistic. It was fantasy. Yet Webb's biometric readings indicated complete sincerity. His stress levels remained elevated, but showed none of the spikes that typically accompany deception in his species. Either he genuinely believed what he was saying, or humans had developed deception capabilities far beyond their known psychological parameters. High Counselor Vrax made the decision that would alter the course of galactic history. Dr. Webb, this session will continue in classified status. All delegates without appropriate security clearances are dismissed. Dr. Webb, you have authorization to present whatever information you believe relevant to our current crisis. As the chamber cleared of junior delegates and civilian observers, Webb activated a personal communication device that had not appeared in any of his previous council appearances. The device projected a holographic display that showed star charts marked with symbols that Zelthan's databases could not identify. Counselors, Webb began, his voice carrying new authority. For the past 18 hours, human forces have been conducting independent operations against Zarathi advance elements. These operations have produced tactical intelligence that fundamentally changes our understanding of Zarathi vulnerabilities. Admiral Taz leaned forward with the intensity of a hunter sensing prey. What sort of independent operations? Human forces were specifically prohibited from engaging Zarathi elements without council authorization. Webb's expression carried the kind of resigned determination that humans seemed to reserve for moments when they had already committed to courses of action that others would consider insane. Admiral Taz, human forces have been conducting operations designed to test specific tactical theories about Zarathi response patterns. These theories were developed through analysis that our experts believed other species would find unconventional. Show us. Vrax commanded with the authority of someone who had run out of patience for diplomatic niceties. Webb activated additional functions on his communication device, and the chamber's main display showed footage that would haunt every delegate present for the rest of their lives. The images showed human ships, small, primitive vessels by galactic standards, engaging Zarathi forces in ways that violated every principle of sound military doctrine. The humans were not trying to outfight the Zarathi. They were not attempting to destroy them through superior firepower or advanced technology. Instead, they were doing something that seemed impossible. They were making the Zarathi afraid. And, in the galaxy's darkest hour, fear would prove to be a weapon more powerful than any technology ever devised. The footage playing on the chamber's main display defied every understanding of military engagement that the assembled delegates possessed. Admiral Taz's predatory instincts had sharpened to a razor focus as he watched human vessels execute maneuvers that should have resulted in immediate annihilation. Instead, the Zarathi forces seemed to be retreating. Dr. Webb stood beside the holographic projector with the kind of quiet intensity that humans displayed when presenting information they knew would be difficult to accept. This engagement occurred 14 hours ago in the Kepler 442 system. Human forces encountered a Zarathi scout formation of approximately 50 vessels. Ambassador Zelthan's crystalline form flickered rapidly as he processed the tactical data. By every known parameter, 50 Zarathi vessels should have been more than adequate to destroy the 12 human ships shown in the recording. Zarathi technology had consistently proven superior to human capabilities by margins that made engagement suicide for the inferior force. Dr. Webb, Counselor THYSS said carefully, her reptilian features arranged in expressions of professional skepticism. This footage appears to show Zarathi forces withdrawing from combat with technologically inferior opponents. Our analysis indicates this would be inconsistent with known Zarathi behavioral patterns. Webb nodded grimly. That's correct, Counselor THYSS. The Zarathi withdrew from an engagement they should have won easily. More significantly, they did not attempt to adapt their tactics or technology to counter human actions. They simply left. High Counselor Vrax's massive stone form shifted with sounds that indicated deep contemplation. Dr. Webb, are you suggesting that human forces have discovered some unknown Zarathi vulnerability? I'm suggesting that human forces have discovered something the galaxy's military experts missed because they were asking the wrong questions, Webb replied. He activated additional controls, and the display shifted to show close-up footage of individual Zarathi vessels during the engagement. What the delegates saw challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of their enemy. The Zarathi ships, which had always appeared to be seamless integrations of technology and organic matter, showed signs of internal conflict during their engagement with human forces. Sections of their hulls pulsed with irregular rhythms. Their weapon systems fired in patterns that suggested coordination problems. Most disturbing of all, some vessels appeared to be attacking each other. Admiral Taz's voice carried undertones that suggested he was reconsidering everything he thought he knew about warfare. Dr. Webb, this footage suggests the Zarathi experienced some form of internal system failure during combat operations. What did human forces do to trigger such responses? Webb's biometric readings spiked as he prepared to reveal information that he clearly knew would be controversial. Admiral, human forces did not attack the Zarathi ships directly. Instead, they targeted the communication frequencies that Zarathi entities use for collective coordination. The silence that followed this revelation was profound. Every delegate in the chamber understood the implications immediately, and none of them wanted to be the first to voice what they were thinking. Counselor THYSS finally broke the silence. Dr. Webb, are you claiming that human forces attacked the Zarathi collective consciousness directly? We disrupted their coordination network using targeted electromagnetic interference, Webb confirmed. Human analysis suggested that the Zarathi collective intelligence might be vulnerable to specific types of signal disruption. The theory was considered too dangerous to test until the current crisis made desperate measures necessary. Zelthan's data processing capabilities strained to comprehend the tactical ramifications. If the Zarathi collective consciousness could be disrupted by electromagnetic interference, then every previous assessment of their capabilities was fundamentally flawed. More importantly, it meant they had a weakness that could potentially be exploited on a strategic scale. Show us more. Vrax commanded with the authority of someone who needed to understand the complete scope of what he was witnessing. The next series of recordings showed progressively larger engagements as human forces tested their theories against increasingly significant Zarathi formations. In each case, the results were consistent. Targeted electromagnetic interference caused visible disruption to Zarathi coordination, leading to tactical failures and eventual withdrawal from combat. This engagement occurred in the Wolf 359 system, Webb narrated as the display showed human forces engaging a Zarathi formation of more than 300 vessels. Human forces used coordinated electromagnetic pulse weapons to disrupt Zarathi communications across multiple frequency spectrums simultaneously. The footage showed something unprecedented in the galaxy's experience with the Zarathi, a complete tactical breakdown of their forces. Zarathi vessels collided with each other as their coordination systems failed. Weapon systems fired randomly, often striking their own ships. Some vessels simply stopped moving entirely, apparently unable to function without constant input from the collective consciousness. Admiral Taz leaned forward with the intensity of a predator sensing a fundamental shift in the nature of the hunt. Dr. Webb, what were the casualties among human forces during this engagement? 0 combat losses, Webb replied quietly. The disruption effect was so complete that Zarathi forces were unable to mount effective offensive operations against human vessels. The implications hit every delegate simultaneously. If human forces could neutralize Zarathi tactical capabilities without suffering losses, then the strategic balance of the current crisis had just shifted dramatically. More importantly, it suggested that the galaxy's most feared enemy might not be invincible after all. THYSS rose from her seat with movements that betrayed excitement underlying her species' legendary composure. Dr. Webb, have human forces tested these tactics against larger Zarathi formations? Webb's expression carried the kind of grim satisfaction that humans seemed to reserve for moments when their optimistic predictions proved correct. Counselors, 6 hours ago, human forces engaged the advanced elements of the main Zarathi force moving toward the Centauri cluster. The engagement involved more than 1,000 Zarathi vessels. The main display shifted to show the most recent footage, and what the delegates saw redefined their understanding of what was possible in the current conflict. Human forces, numbering fewer than 200 vessels, had apparently achieved complete tactical dominance over a Zarathi formation that outnumbered them 5-1. The engagement showed human ships working in coordinated formations to create overlapping electromagnetic interference fields. As the interference intensified, the Zarathi formation began to collapse in on itself. Ships that had operated with perfect coordination suddenly seemed unable to avoid collisions with their neighbors. Weapons that had fired with devastating accuracy began missing targets by impossible margins. The Zarathi force withdrew after losing approximately 40% of their vessels, Webb continued. More significantly, the withdrawal was disorganized and chaotic. Zarathi forces have never demonstrated such tactical confusion in previous engagements. Vrax processed this information with his characteristic patience, but his voice carried harmonics that indicated profound recognition of the strategic implications. Dr. Webb, are you informing this council that human forces have developed tactics capable of neutralizing the Zarathi threat to galactic civilization? I'm informing the council that human forces have identified exploitable vulnerabilities in Zarathi operations, Webb replied carefully. However, implementing these tactics on a strategic scale will require resources and coordination that human forces cannot provide independently. Zelthan accessed strategic databases and began running calculations based on the tactical parameters Webb had revealed. If electromagnetic interference could indeed neutralize Zarathi coordination capabilities, then properly equipped galactic forces might be able to reverse the tide of the current invasion. The key limitation would be the technological requirements for generating interference fields of sufficient magnitude and precision. Admiral Taz's predatory instincts focused on the operational details that would determine whether theoretical possibilities could become practical realities. Dr. Webb, what are the technological requirements for implementing these electromagnetic interference tactics on a fleet-wide scale? Webb activated additional display functions, showing technical specifications that made every delegate in the chamber reconsider their assumptions about human technological capabilities. The interference systems that human forces had deployed were not primitive adaptations of existing technology. They were sophisticated systems that demonstrated understanding of electromagnetic principles that exceeded the galaxy's current knowledge. Human engineers have developed interference generation systems that can operate across multiple frequency spectrums simultaneously, Webb explained. These systems can be installed on existing ships or deployed as dedicated platforms, depending on tactical requirements. HFYSS studied the technical specifications with the kind of focused attention that her species applied to problems that could determine survival outcomes. Dr. Webb, these systems appear to be significantly more advanced than our assessments of human technological capabilities would suggest. How long have human forces been developing these technologies? Webb's stress indicators spiked noticeably as he prepared to reveal information that was clearly sensitive. Counselors, human military research has been focused on anti-Zarathi technologies for approximately 30 years. These projects were classified at levels that precluded sharing with the galactic community. The revelation that humans had been conducting secret military research for 3 decades sent ripples of concern through the assembled delegates. Every species maintained some level of classified research, but the idea that humans had been preparing for war with the Zarathi while publicly maintaining their status as a minor military power suggested planning capabilities that no one had suspected. Why was this research kept secret? Vrax asked with the kind of patient authority that demanded complete honesty. Webb's expression carried the resignation of someone who had known this question would eventually be asked. High Counselor, human military leadership concluded that the galactic community would not take human tactical theories seriously if they were presented through normal channels. The decision was made to develop practical capabilities first, then demonstrate their effectiveness when circumstances made such demonstrations necessary. Admiral Taz's features sharpened with recognition of the strategic thinking underlying such an approach. Dr. Webb, are you informing us that human forces have been preparing for this specific crisis for 30 years? Human forces have been preparing for the possibility that the Zarathi containment might fail, Webb confirmed. Our analysis suggested that when containment failed, it would fail catastrophically and with little warning. Emergency response protocols required that effective countermeasures be developed in advance. Zelfin's processing system struggled to integrate this revelation with everything he thought he understood about human strategic planning. The idea that humans had correctly predicted the failure of galactic containment strategies decades before it occurred suggested analytical capabilities that exceeded even their own claims about their military potential. Dr. Webb, HFYSS said carefully. If human forces have been developing anti-Zarathi technologies for 30 years, why has this research not been shared with the galactic community until now? Webb's biometric readings indicated elevated stress, but his voice remained steady. Counselor HFYSS, human requests for military cooperation have been rejected by this council 17 times in the past solar cycle alone. Each rejection cited human technological inadequacy and strategic unreliability as justifications for continued exclusion from military operations. The observation hung in the chamber's atmosphere like an indictment. Every delegate present had participated in those rejections, confident that human forces lacked the capabilities to contribute meaningfully to galactic security. Now they were discovering that human forces had not only developed relevant capabilities, but had done so specifically in response to a threat that the galactic community's own experts had failed to adequately prepare for. Vrax's massive form shifted as he processed the strategic implications of their situation. Dr. Webb, what do human forces require to implement these anti-Zarathi tactics on a scale sufficient to address the current crisis? Webb activated final display functions, showing deployment plans that would require the coordination of every major military force in the galaxy. High Counselor, effective implementation requires installing interference generation systems on approximately 2,000 ships across all member species fleets. Human forces can provide the technology and technical support, but the installation and operational deployment requires resources that only the combined galactic community can supply. The scale of the proposed operation was staggering. Retrofitting 2,000 ships with unknown human technology would require unprecedented cooperation between species that had never coordinated on such a level. More challenging would be the tactical integration required to implement coordinated interference operations across multiple species command structures. Admiral Taz reviewed the deployment timelines with the focused attention of someone who understood that every hour of delay could cost billions of lives. Dr. Webb, how long would such installation and integration operations require? With full cooperation from all member species, approximately 72 hours, Webb replied. The Zarathi main force will reach the Centauri cluster in 96 hours. For the first time in the session, Zelfin heard something that sounded almost like hope in the voices of delegates as they began discussing practical implementation details. If human tactical theories were correct, and if the galactic community could achieve unprecedented cooperation in record time, they might actually have a chance to save the 40 billion lives that hung in the balance. But first, they would have to overcome 300 years of treating humanity as the galaxy's military joke. And time was running out. The next 60 hours would be remembered as the most intensive coordinated effort in galactic history. The council chambers had been transformed into an operational command center, with delegates from 47 species working alongside human technical teams to implement technology that could save or doom entire civilizations. The transformation was both practical and symbolic. Species that had spent centuries maintaining careful diplomatic distances were now working shoulder to shoulder with beings they barely understood. Admiral Taz moved between technical stations with the fluid grace of a hunter coordinating a pack effort. His predatory instincts had adapted quickly to the new environment, treating the retrofit operation as the most important hunt his species had ever undertaken. Installation progress report. He called to the human technical coordinator managing the primary workstations. Chief Engineer Maria Santos, whose presence in the council chambers would have been unthinkable 72 hours earlier, consulted displays showing real-time data from 17 different star systems. Her stress indicators remained elevated, but Her voice carried the steady confidence that humans seem to generate when confronting seemingly impossible engineering challenges. Admiral, we have completed installations on 437 vessels across 12 species fleets. Operational testing shows interference generation capabilities within acceptable parameters. Counselor THYSS monitored the tactical integration processes with the focused attention that her species brought to survival situations. The coordination requirements for implementing human electromagnetic interference tactics across multiple species command structures had revealed gaps in galactic military cooperation that no one had previously recognized. Chief Santos, our preliminary tests indicate that Vorthan hunting protocols interfere with Altarian collective navigation systems. How do we resolve compatibility issues between species that have never operated in close coordination? Santos moved to a different display showing three-dimensional tactical formations that represented the combined galactic fleet as it would need to operate during anti-Zarathi operations. The complexity was staggering. Thousands of ships from dozens of species, each with different capabilities and limitations, would need to function as a single coordinated unit. Counselor THYSS, we've developed adaptive coordination protocols that allow each species to maintain their natural operational patterns while contributing to the overall interference field generation. Dr. Webb worked alongside Zelfin at intelligence analysis stations, processing incoming data about Zarathi force movements and updating tactical projections in real time. The cooperation between human and crystalline analytical methods had produced insights that neither species could have achieved independently. Ambassador Zelfin, the latest reconnaissance shows the main Zarathi force has accelerated their advance towards Centauri. They're going to arrive 18 hours ahead of our original projections. Zelfin's crystalline form flickered rapidly as he processed the implications. If the Zarathi arrived before the Galactic fleet completed its retrofit operations, they would face the same kind of catastrophic defeat that had destroyed the Proxima defense grid. Dr. Webb, can installation operations be accelerated to compensate for the reduced timeline? We're already operating at maximum sustainable pace, Webb replied grimly. Pushing faster would compromise installation quality and risk system failures during combat operations. We need those 18 hours. High Counselor Vrax stood at the central command platform, his massive stone form serving as an anchor of stability while chaos swirled around him. His geological patience had proven invaluable during the retrofit operations, providing steady leadership while representatives of other species struggled to adapt to the pace of emergency cooperation. Chief Santos, what options do we have for buying additional time? Santos consulted displays showing the positions of human forces that had been conducting independent operations against Zarathi advance elements. Her expression carried the kind of grim determination that humans seemed to reserve for moments when they had to attempt the impossible. High Counselor, human forces can deploy to intercept the Zarathi advance and attempt to slow their progress through harassment operations. However, such operations would be extremely high risk. Admiral Taz's predatory instincts focused immediately on the tactical implications. Chief Santos, define extremely high risk in operational terms. Admiral, human forces would be engaging the full Zarathi main formation with approximately 200 ships. Even with electromagnetic interference capabilities, the numerical disadvantage would be overwhelming. Casualties could approach 100%. The silence that followed this assessment was profound. Every delegate in the chamber understood that Santos was describing a suicide mission designed to buy time for the galaxy's primary defensive effort. More troubling was the recognition that human forces were apparently willing to undertake such a mission without being asked. Dr. Webb spoke into the silence with the quiet authority that humans displayed when stating facts that others found difficult to accept. Counselors, human forces have been preparing for this possibility since the crisis began. Volunteer crews are already en route to intercept positions. THYSS turned from her tactical displays with movements that betrayed the shock underlying her species' legendary composure. Dr. Webb, are you informing us that human forces have deployed for suicide operations without seeking council authorization? I'm informing the council that human forces are implementing contingency plans designed to protect galactic civilization, Webb replied carefully. These plans were developed independently because the time required for council authorization would eliminate their tactical effectiveness. Vrax processed this information with his characteristic patience, but his voice carried undertones that indicated profound recognition of what humans were offering to sacrifice. Dr. Webb, how many human personnel are involved in these contingency operations? Approximately 40,000 volunteers, High Counselor. The number hit every delegate like a physical blow. 40,000 people willing to die to buy time for civilizations that had spent 3 centuries treating them as second-class citizens. The scale of the sacrifice was both humbling and terrifying. Humbling because of its generosity, terrifying because of what it said about the desperation of their situation. Zelfin's data processing system struggled to integrate the human approach to military planning with every model he had developed for understanding species behavior. Dr. Webb, why are human forces willing to accept such casualties for operations that benefit species that have consistently excluded them from military cooperation? Webb's biometric readings indicated complex emotional states that the chamber's systems could not adequately interpret. Ambassador Zelfin, human military doctrine emphasizes that some things are worth dying for, regardless of whether others appreciate the sacrifice. Protecting 40 billion innocent lives qualifies as such a cause. The retrofit operations continued around this conversation, with human technical teams working alongside galactic specialists to install systems that might prove to be the difference between survival and extinction. The cooperation had evolved from reluctant acceptance to genuine collaboration as specialists from different species discovered that their combined capabilities exceeded what any of them could achieve independently. Chief Santos moved between workstations with the focused efficiency that humans seem to generate under extreme pressure. Admiral Taz, we have completed installations on 812 vessels. Tactical integration testing shows successful coordination across 15 different species command protocols. Admiral Taz reviewed the deployment timelines with the predatory focus that his species brought to life or death situations. Chief Santos, at current pace, how many vessels will be operational when the Zarathi reach Centauri? Approximately 1,600 ships, Admiral. That should be sufficient for initial deployment, but optimal effectiveness requires the full 2,000 vessel configuration. Dr. Webb looked up from his intelligence analysis displays with an expression that combined human optimism with realistic assessment of their situation. Chief Santos, preliminary reports from human harassment operations indicate they're having some success slowing Zarathi advance. If current trends continue, we might gain back 12 of the 18 hours we lost. THYSS studied the tactical projections with the focused attention that her species applied to problems that could determine survival outcomes. Dr. Webb, what is the cost of these additional 12 hours in terms of human casualties? Webb's stress indicators spiked as he accessed casualty reports from the ongoing operations. Current losses stand at approximately 30% of deployed forces, Counselor THYSS. However, the harassment operations are proving more effective than projected. Human forces are not only slowing Zarathi advance, they're causing measurable degradation of Zarathi force cohesion. The news that human forces were actually damaging Zarathi capabilities rather than simply delaying them sent ripples of hope through the command center. If harassment operations could weaken the main Zarathi force before the primary engagement, it might tip the tactical balance in favor of the combined galactic fleet. Zelfin processed incoming intelligence data with the rapid analysis capabilities that made his species valuable in crisis situations. Dr. Webb, reconnaissance reports indicate that Zarathi formations are showing coordination problems similar to those observed in your smaller-scale engagements. Are human forces able to disrupt collective consciousness operations across such large formations? The interference effects scale with the size of the generating systems, Webb replied. Human harassment forces are using portable versions of the technology being installed on the main fleet. The effects are less pronounced than what we'll achieve with the full installation, but they're definitely measurable. Santos called attention to a new development that would change their tactical situation yet again. Admiral Taz, we're receiving communications from human deep space monitoring stations. They're detecting additional Zarathi formations moving from multiple vectors toward galactic core systems. The main displays shifted to show updated star charts that revealed the true scope of the Zarathi invasion. What they had been treating as a single massive assault was actually the opening phase of a coordinated multi-vector attack that would strike simultaneously at dozens of critical systems throughout galactic space. Admiral Taz studied the updated projections with the intensity of a predator, recognizing that the hunt had become far more complex than anticipated. Chief Santos, how many additional ships would we need to address simultaneous attacks across multiple systems? Santos ran calculations that painted a picture of strategic requirements that exceeded every resource the galaxy could muster. Admiral, effective response to multi-vector assault would require approximately 8,000 ships with full electromagnetic interference capabilities. Current galactic fleet assets number fewer than 3,000 vessels across all member species. Vrax processed this information with his geological patience, but his voice carried harmonics that indicated recognition of an impossible strategic situation. Chief Santos, are you informing us that the galaxy lacks sufficient military assets to address the full scope of the Zarathi invasion? I'm informing the Council that conventional tactical approaches cannot address the current threat level, Santos replied grimly. However, human strategic analysis suggests alternative approaches that might prove effective with available resources. Dr. Webb moved to the primary display system and activated projections that would challenge every delegate's understanding of what was possible in military operations. Counselors, human forces propose implementing electromagnetic interference operations on a galactic scale, using coordinated planetary defense systems rather than ship-based platforms. The scope of what Webb was proposing exceeded anything that had ever been attempted in galactic history. Instead of limiting electromagnetic interference to localized fleet operations, humans were suggesting that entire star systems could be turned into interference generation platforms capable of disrupting Zarathi operations across interstellar distances. THYSS reviewed the technical specifications with the focused attention that her species brought to concepts that seemed to violate known physical principles. Dr. Webb, are you suggesting that planetary defense systems can generate electromagnetic interference across light years of distance? I'm suggesting that properly coordinated planetary systems can create interference fields that propagate through subspace communication networks that the Zarathi use for long-range coordination, Webb replied. If successful, such operations could disrupt Zarathi collective consciousness across entire sectors simultaneously. The implications hit every delegate simultaneously. If humans were correct, they might be able to turn the galaxy itself into a weapon capable of neutralizing the Zarathi threat at its source. But implementing such a strategy would require cooperation and coordination on a scale that galactic civilization had never achieved. Time was running out, and they were about to discover whether the species that had been mocked for 3 centuries could save everyone who had mocked them. The moment of truth arrived with the kind of terrifying clarity that defines the hinge points of history. In the command center that had once been the Galactic Council chambers, representatives of 47 species watched displays showing the convergence of forces that would determine the survival or extinction of galactic civilization. The Zarathi main formations approached their targets across multiple vectors, their collective hunger focused on consumption that would transform entire sectors into feeding grounds for an intelligence that recognized no value beyond its own expansion. High Counselor Vrax stood at the central command platform, his massive stone form serving as an anchor while chaos prepared to engulf everything they had spent millennia building. Tactical status report. He commanded with the geological authority that had seen him through crises spanning centuries. Admiral Taz moved between tactical stations with the fluid grace of a predator coordinating the most important hunt in galactic history. His species had evolved to track prey across impossible terrain, and now those instincts focused on tracking the movements of enemies whose defeat or victory would determine whether there would be a galaxy left to hunt in. High Counselor, combined fleet assets show 1,943 vessels with operational electromagnetic interference capabilities. Deployment formations are achieving coordination levels that exceed our most optimistic projections. Chief Engineer Santos monitored the planetary defense integration systems with the focused intensity that humans generated when confronting challenges that required perfection or catastrophe. Her displays showed real-time data from defensive installations across 217 star systems, each one now contributing to an interference network that spanned distances previously thought impossible to coordinate across. Admiral Taz, planetary defense systems are achieving synchronized interference generation at 94% efficiency. The network is stable and ready for full activation. Dr. Webb worked alongside Ambassador Zelfin at the Intelligence Coordination Center, processing incoming data from human harassment forces still engaged with Zarathi advanced elements. The cooperation between human tactical analysis and crystalline data processing had produced real-time battlefield intelligence that painted a picture of an enemy experiencing something they had never encountered before, genuine technological disruption of their fundamental operational capabilities. Admiral, harassment operations report continued success in degrading Zarathi force cohesion. Enemy formations are showing coordination problems that extend beyond their immediate engagement zones. Zelfin's crystalline form pulsed with rapid data streams as he processed the implications of what human forces had accomplished through 3 days of desperate fighting. Dr. Webb, the interference effects appear to be propagating through Zarathi communication networks faster than their adaptation capabilities can compensate. They are experiencing system-wide coordination failures that suggest fundamental vulnerabilities in their collective consciousness architecture. Counselor THYSS monitored the strategic coordination displays with the focused attention that her species brought to situations where perfect execution represented the difference between survival and extinction. The tactical integration of 47 different species' military doctrines into a single coordinated operation had required innovations in command structure that exceeded anything attempted in galactic history. Admiral Taz, fleet coordination protocols are achieving tactical unity across species barriers that military theorists considered insurmountable. We have created something unprecedented. The main displays showed the approaching Zarathi formations with the kind of detail that made their threat immediate and personal. Thousands of ships that had consumed civilizations across multiple galactic arms, their organic technology pulsing with hunger that had never been satisfied, and never would be satisfied until everything living had been absorbed into their collective nightmare. Intelligence estimates suggested they carried converted biomass from more than 50 billion sentient beings, transformed into extensions of a collective consciousness that recognized no value beyond its own expansion. All stations report ready for synchronized activation, Santos announced, her voice carrying the steady confidence that humans seem to generate when facing challenges that others considered impossible. Planetary defense networks show optimal coordination across 217 systems. Fleet formations are positioned for maximum interference field generation. We are ready to implement galactic-scale electromagnetic interference operations. Admiral Taz reviewed the deployment status with predatory focus that had sharpened to razor intensity. Chief Santos, confirmation. We are prepared to activate interference fields across multiple star systems simultaneously. Confirmed, Admiral. Network activation will generate coordinated electromagnetic interference across approximately 40% of galactic space. Theoretical models suggest this should disrupt Zarathi collective consciousness operations on an unprecedented scale. Dr. Webb looked up from his displays with an expression that combined human determination with realistic assessment of what they were about to attempt. Admiral, we should understand that we are implementing theoretical technology on a scale that has never been tested. We know the interference effects work against individual Zarathi formations, but we don't know how their collective consciousness will respond to systematic disruption across such distances. Vrax processed this information with his characteristic patience, but his voice carried harmonics that indicated recognition of the historic moment they had reached. Dr. Webb, are you informing us that success is not guaranteed? I'm informing the Council that we are attempting something that exceeds the parameters of all previous military operations, Webb replied honestly. However, failure to attempt it guarantees the extinction of galactic civilization. The choice had reduced to its essential elements. Attempt the impossible or accept the inevitable. For 3 centuries, the galaxy's great civilizations had treated humanity as too primitive, too unpredictable, and too unreliable to be trusted with serious responsibilities. Now those same civilizations were placing their survival in human hands because humans had demonstrated the capability to conceive and implement solutions that more advanced species had never imagined. Zarathi main formations will reach optimal engagement range in 17 minutes, THYSS announced, her voice carrying the controlled tension that her species displayed when survival hung in the balance. All defensive preparations must be complete before that deadline. Santos moved between control stations with the focused efficiency that humans seem to generate under extreme pressure. Final system checks show all networks operational. Planetary defense installations are synchronized and ready. Fleet formations are in position. We are ready to activate on your command, High Counselor. Zelfin's data processing systems track the approach of enemy formations with the kind of analytical precision that made his species valuable in crisis situations. High Counselor, Zarathi forces are beginning final acceleration toward their target systems. Once they commit to attack vectors, they will be unable to withdraw without significant tactical reorganization. Admiral Taz studied tactical displays showing the positions of forces that represented the combined military might of galactic civilization. 1,900 ships carrying technology developed by a species that most delegates had considered barely capable of interstellar travel, supported by planetary defense networks coordinated across distances that challenged every understanding of what was possible in military operations. High Counselor, fleet commanders report ready for engagement. All species forces are integrated and prepared for coordinated operations. Vrax stood silent for long moments, his massive form processing the weight of a decision that would determine the future of every living thing in the galaxy. The geological patience that characterized his species served him well in this moment, allowing him to consider the full implications of what they were about to attempt before committing galactic civilization to a course of action that could not be reversed. Dr. Webb, Vrax said finally, his voice carrying the authority of 47 civilizations. Will human forces be able to coordinate this operation if conventional command structures prove inadequate? Webb's stress indicators spiked as he prepared to reveal the final piece of information that would define how history remembered this day. High Counselor, human forces have prepared autonomous coordination protocols that can maintain network operations even if communication with Central Command is disrupted. The interference network will continue functioning regardless of what happens to this command center. The implication was clear. Humans had designed their system to continue operating even if every other species in the galaxy was destroyed. They had created a weapon capable of functioning independently, operated by a species that others had spent centuries dismissing as insignificant. The trust required to activate such a system was absolute, and the consequences of betraying that trust would be permanent. Activate all systems, Vrax commanded. Authorization Omega 77. All species, all networks, full activation. The response was immediate and visible on every display in the command center. Across 217 star systems, planetary defense installations activated electromagnetic interference generators that had been installed in impossible timeframes through cooperation that exceeded anything in galactic history. The combined galactic fleet began generating coordinated interference fields that propagated through subspace at faster-than-light speeds. For the first time in galactic history, an entire spiral arm was functioning as a single coordinated weapon. The effects on approaching Zorathi formations were immediate and catastrophic. On display screens throughout the command center, delegates watched as enemy formations that had operated with perfect coordination for millennia began experiencing systematic failures that cascaded through their collective consciousness like a virus designed to destroy technological unity. Zorathi ships that had moved in perfect formation began colliding with each other as their coordination systems failed. Weapons that had fired with devastating accuracy began striking their own vessels as targeting systems lost connection with central coordination. Most dramatically, individual Zorathi entities began attacking the collective consciousness nodes that controlled their formations, as if the interference had awakened some suppressed individual awareness that recognized the collective as an enemy. Interference effects are exceeding all projections, Santos announced, her voice carrying amazement that penetrated her professional composure. Zorathi formations are experiencing complete tactical breakdown across all engagement zones. They're not just losing coordination, they're actively fighting each other. Admiral has watched tactical displays that showed something unprecedented in galactic military history. An enemy whose overwhelming technological superiority was being neutralized by a weapon that attacked their fundamental organizational structure rather than their physical capabilities. Chief Santos, are Zorathi forces attempting to adapt to the interference effects? Negative, Admiral. The interference appears to be disrupting their adaptation capabilities along with their coordination systems. They're locked in feedback loops that prevent them from developing effective countermeasures. Dr. Webb monitored the intelligence networks that tracked Zorathi responses across multiple sectors. Admiral, we're detecting systematic communication failures throughout Zorathi territory. The interference effects are propagating beyond the immediate engagement zones and affecting their entire collective consciousness network. Zelthan processed data streams that revealed the scope of what they had accomplished. Dr. Webb, are you suggesting that the interference effects are disrupting Zorathi operations throughout their empire? I'm suggesting that we may have triggered a collapse of the Zorathi collective consciousness that extends far beyond our immediate tactical objectives, Webb replied. The interference is propagating through their communication networks faster than they can isolate affected sectors. The implications hit every delegate simultaneously. They had not simply defeated a Zorathi invasion. They had potentially triggered the collapse of the entire Zorathi civilization. The collective consciousness that had consumed 17 previous civilizations was experiencing systematic failure that could lead to the extinction of the galaxy's most feared enemy. Hours later, as reports came in from across galactic space, the scope of their victory became clear. The Zorathi formations that had threatened 40 billion lives were either destroyed or fleeing in complete disarray. More significantly, intelligence networks reported that Zorathi territory beyond the galactic rim had gone silent, suggesting that the interference effects had indeed triggered empire-wide collapse of their collective consciousness. Threat assessment. Vrax asked as the immediate crisis passed into history. Admiral Taz reviewed intelligence summaries that painted a picture of transformation that extended far beyond military victory. High Counselor, Zorathi forces have withdrawn from all galactic territories. Intelligence suggests their collective consciousness has fragmented into isolated groups that lack the coordination capabilities necessary for large-scale operations. The immediate threat to galactic civilization has been eliminated. In the aftermath of victory, as delegates began the process of returning to their home worlds to rebuild what the crisis had damaged, one fact remained clear. The species they had mocked for 3 centuries had saved them all. Human tactical innovation, human technological creativity, and human willingness to sacrifice everything for strangers had provided the solution that the galaxy's finest minds had never conceived. But, perhaps most importantly, 47 species had learned that cooperation could achieve things that none of them could accomplish alone. The galaxy that emerged from the crisis would be different, not just because the Zorathi threat had been eliminated, but because the barriers between species had been broken down by necessity and rebuilt through mutual respect. The council chambers would be restored, but the seating arrangements would be different. Humanity would no longer occupy the section reserved for minor members. They had earned their place among the galaxy's great civilizations through the kind of decisive action that defines historical turning points. And, in the depths of space, where Zorathi ships drifted silent and dark, individual entities that had been part of a collective consciousness for millennia began to experience something that none of them had known before. The terrifying, exhilarating, utterly alien sensation of thinking their own thoughts. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again.